Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our chat here about community building. My name is Roshan and you see Zach as well on the screen. We're with a company called Exygy. We'll do some intros in a second. We are in the process at Exygy of building out an affordable housing product across the San Francisco Bay Area here in California. And we're here to chat about how community building has been a really critical piece to scaling that product. And I want to kind of give a shout out to the fact that a lot of the principles and core pieces of what we'll say here are really rooted in community organizing and community building. There's obviously a long history in that space about how people approach building communities, and we're going to pull on a lot of that in our discussion here. Great, let's dive in. Zach, you want to do an intro? You're muted.
Cool, thanks, Roshan. Hey, everyone. We are Zach and Ro from Exygy. So Exygy works with social impact organizations to use design and technology to improve lives. We've been doing it for 12, 13, 14 years, depending on how you count. We're a certified B Corp. We've been a B Corp for over 10 years. Really proud of that. I'm really proud of all the work we do. Myself, I'm a recovering software engineer. Today I do design, rapid prototyping, strategy, and I get to work kind of at the edge of some of our most exciting and interesting work in community building, including this work we're going to present to you today as a case study of building minimal viable communities.
Great. And like I mentioned, my name is Roshan. I'm one of the partners at Exygy along with Zach. And my background is in the social sector. I've worked in the social sector for over a decade, first on the nonprofit side and more recently on the technology side, starting out as a product manager and now as a partner at Exygy. I lead Exygy's civic sector practice. So that side of our organization is really focused on local and state government work on issues like housing, transit, and criminal justice. Housing and community building are both pretty close to my heart. One, because one of my first jobs was as a housing counselor in the South. And also community building just being a really core part of my blood with a background in kind of racial justice and cross-cultural work. And of course, in the nonprofit sector as well. Cool.
So today we're going to talk about building community in a complex ecosystem, which is the intersection of affordable housing, nonprofits, and government. We're going to talk about some of the key lessons we've learned in applying the philosophy that we take to all our work of Agile, building the smallest possible thing, learning from launching it, building on top of it, and applying that philosophy to scaling impact across a region and across the state. The case study we're going to be talking about today, Ro, if you could go to the next slide, please, is in affordable housing. As Ro mentioned, this is work we've been doing for about 5 years across our community here in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, and across the state of California. 5 years ago, when we started this work, there was no one-stop shop to find and apply for affordable housing in the Bay Area. It's no secret that there is a massive housing crisis going on across the country that's particularly acute where we are here in the Bay. There's a huge need for units, and while some progressive jurisdictions like the city and county of San Francisco were committed to building more housing, there was no way for folks to find it. There was no central database, and there were dozens of different websites from government agencies, nonprofits, each of which were basically blocks of text with complex eligibility criteria, really difficult for anybody to understand, let alone folks for whom English may be their second language or who may be accessing the internet for 30 minutes at a time at the library. So even if you could get through these blocks of text and these terrible government websites and determine that you might be eligible for an opportunity, you had just earned yourself the privilege of filling out a 15-page paper application, attaching proof of income, which you may not have, proof of eligibility, proof of preferences to your application. It was an extremely complicated process that took days and weeks for folks to get into. And all that effort was for a tiny chance of getting in, because we'd see thousands of applications come in for a handful of units. And so our work was focused on providing an experience for folks looking for affordable housing that was the same quality as those who are looking for market rate housing. And Ro's going to tell you a little bit about how we've gone through that process.
Thanks, Zach. So yeah, as Zach mentioned, we were tackling this piece of the issue where it was really hard for people to search and find the housing and then apply for it. And what Zach also didn't mention is that all of that process was on paper. It was not digital yet. And so people had to fill out these really lengthy applications on paper and take it in person, again, for a small chance at housing, like he mentioned. So in 2015, we designed and built and launched an initial version of the product you see here, which is the Affordable Housing Portal. We had this vision for doing the work across the Bay and across California, but we started with one jurisdiction who really led the charge in conceptualizing this solution, which was the City and County of San Francisco. And so what the product does is it aggregates all of the affordable housing listings in one place. And it also standardizes the format of those listings. And once a person kind of reads through the listings and understands the particular eligibility criteria for that listing, oftentimes buildings are senior only or veteran only or for a particular income level, then they're also able to use the product to apply online in what we've called a short form common application. And so what that means is it's short. It takes less than 15 minutes to complete online. It's a step-by-step, really easy to read application. And it's a common application. So now you can use the same application to apply to any listing in the City and County of San Francisco. You don't have to have a particular application for that building. And then the product also helps the housing developers then lease up the building. They see all the applications coming in lottery rank order, as the city does, and they're able to place the right people in the right units based on eligibility criteria. So all of this took a lot of stakeholder engagement for people to agree on what does a listing look like? What does a short form application look like? What are all the fields we really need in order for someone to apply for affordable housing? And it also helped create a transparent process between the city and county and all of the housing developers. So the housing developers had to report back to the city and county who is placed in what unit, and the product helped them do that as well. The reasons this product has been really critical are to really focus on streamlining things for the end user. They now have a really consistent experience every time they're searching and applying, and have an ease of use of applying for that small chance at affordable housing. And then the second reason it's important is that it allows the city and county to start to collect a lot of data around who's looking for housing, who's applying, who's actually getting placed. And the hope in the long run is that this data influences both policies and programs at the local level and policies at the state level around housing. Just to give you guys a sense, we've had over 400,000 applications for affordable housing in the past 4 or 5 years on the San Francisco site. And in San Francisco, about 100 households get placed every month into housing. Great, so we're gonna talk a little bit about how did we get to this place of adoption, both from the end user in terms of actually using the site to apply, and from all these various stakeholders. The stakeholder groups included the city and county, as well as a bunch of different types of housing developers, and then housing counselors and advocates that would help people apply and navigate the system. Again, a little bit of a shout out to community organizing here. I had a community organizer friend last week who told me that some of the key elements to building community include two things, which are relationships and power. So I kind of wanted to highlight those here because I think we'll talk about them in the next 10 or 15 minutes. Relationships being the idea that if we understand each other, if we understand people's pain points, where they're coming from, that we can better work together. And power meaning, there's a lot of different types of power. I'm referencing sort of collective power, that if we come together across organizations, we actually have more influence together. And if we reveal the power people have in their positions, whether they're at the city or at a housing developer, they can realize that they can make this process better for end users. So where did this phrase minimum viable community come about? It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. It references minimum viable product, which comes from the software industry. So those who are not as familiar, I'll do a quick overview. Minimum viable product, like Zach has referenced, means launching the smallest meaningful version of a product as quickly as possible. So smallest meaningful version of a product as quickly as possible, getting it out the door. And what does that look like? So in software, we have a process of developing products called Agile product management. And Agile is centered around this idea that if you get something out the door really quickly, then you're going to start to be able to get feedback from users as to whether you've met their need. So instead of spending years and years building a car and launching that car 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road, and people saying, this is actually not the car I wanted, you might launch something really small, like a skateboard, and get people to use it. And they're able to give you feedback on saying, like, I love the color of this, I love the wheels, I just want to get from point A to point B faster than a skateboard can get me there. So you get that feedback and you're able to iterate on the product and build it out over time. So Agile product management is really centered around this concept of the feedback loop with the user. So our concept of minimum viable community is centered around coalescing the smallest meaningful group of stakeholders as quickly as possible. So again, smallest meaningful group of stakeholders as quickly as possible. So while minimum viable product might be about getting that feedback loop from users really quickly, minimum viable community is about building momentum for some sort of change and improvement. So centered around starting to build that momentum with a core group of people. The problem we started to tackle about housing in the Bay Area and people being able to find it and apply for it is a big, hairy problem, and the Bay Area is really large. It has 9 counties, it's close to 8 million residents, 188 different cities. All of these places have different processes and different ways of getting people access to housing. So we had to figure out what is the group of people we could coalesce to initiate that change process. And Zach's going to talk a little bit about how minimum viable community looked in action.
Yes, so thanks, Ro. In the city and county of San Francisco, we took an agile approach to building the smallest possible thing with the smallest group of users first. We started with San Francisco, which is a city and a county, so one city. We started with one group of housing developers and a small set of housing advocates. And as Ro mentioned, if we had tried to do all of the housing departments across the Bay Area all at once, and all the housing advocates and all the cities that are in the Bay Area, we would have gotten a lot of reasons why what we were trying to do wasn't possible. We certainly heard those reasons as we coalesced even with a small group, but by bringing a small group together and having them co-create a solution with us, we turned our community into our champions. And I think what's really critical about the minimal viable community concept is that we are then able to use that community that you build with first to become your advocates to go out into the broader community and expand your impact. So Ro, if you could go to the next slide. We then worked with additional housing developers in the city and county of San Francisco. And when those housing developers were able to see how pleased that first group of developers were with the work we had done, they started saying things not like, ooh, common application, I don't know, we've got our own thing. Instead, they started saying, how can we be a part of this? We see the benefit. We see our peers, folks we trust, who are saying how great this system is. How can we be a part? And so bringing the developers from our first group into our second group allowed us to turn our community into our advocates. And then after a couple of years of building on top of the product in the city and county of San Francisco, we started going to our neighboring communities. And we brought with us our partners from our existing community. We brought our partners from the city and county of San Francisco who were thrilled with the work that we had done together, who were so excited about scaling this impact outside of the borders of the city and county. And so we went and talked to the county of San Mateo and all 20 cities in the county. I don't know if you could go to the next slide. We then started talking with folks in Alameda County and city of San Jose. And by going to those communities with our existing community in tow as advocates, we were able to bring the wider community in. And I think that secret, that really special sauce there was ensuring that we had folks that were trusted as we expanded into a larger footprint. And if we had tried to do this all at once in the entire Bay Area, I don't think it would have been possible to have the impact that we've had today. This is where we are at today. We have a system, a one-stop shop for affordable housing that is spreading across the Bay Area. We have a clear roadmap to get to a single application, to get to a single listings portal. And we're really excited about the work that we're doing in the Bay. And now we're using that work to expand to an even wider community. So we're in conversations with folks in the 6-county Sacramento region. And I don't know if you could go one more slide, as well as in the 88 cities in LA County. And how are we able to have authentic conversations with those partners is about bringing the community that we've been so successful with here, there. We've built so many partnerships with nonprofits in the Bay Area that happen to operate across the state. And those folks are coming with us as we go and talk about the impact that we can have across in a broader region. And in doing so, we are able to bring a much larger community, the state of California, along on the journey of impact that we're on.
Great. So I'm going to highlight some of the lessons we've learned as we've scaled across the Bay Area, and so that hopefully can help you guys as you're also scaling similar solutions in your work. So there's 4 key lessons that we wanted to share with you guys. And the first one is starting with a diverse set of enthusiasts. So we've kind of highlighted a bunch of the different stakeholders that are involved in this process, whether it's city and county jurisdictional staff or housing developers or advocates, as well as the applicants themselves. So in terms of bringing together a group of enthusiasts, the main goal for us was really to take the time to understand them. So to understand their various needs and motivations. Sometimes a city and county like San Francisco, who really led this charge, wants to actively solve a problem and make a process better for their residents. Other times, the housing developers, for example, just want to solve a pain point of theirs and get eligible applicants into their units and not have vacant units if there were vacancies for a month or two. And we really got to know all of the various enthusiasts and stakeholders and highlighted common goals between them. And even kind of mapped some of the dynamics between the different stakeholder groups. Or, for example, the housing developers had a role to report back to the city anytime someone was placed into a unit. And that process was really cumbersome, and the housing developers wanted to, do the reports back to the city, but just saw it as a really burdensome process while they were also dealing with reporting back to their other funding sources. And the city, of course, wanted to get reports from them. So highlighting those dynamics between stakeholder groups also helped us solution between them. The second is around showing a vision and showing follow through. So we were lucky in that the city and county of San Francisco took a lot of leadership here in terms of the vision. They wanted to really improve the process for residents that they were seeing really struggle through this search and application process. And they had a lot of great principles that they brought to the table, one of which was a principle of no dead ends. And I really like this one in particular because it essentially meant that we didn't want to leave anyone in any part of the process to say, okay, well, you're not eligible for this, so I guess bye. We wanted to give them a next step to say, here's other resources, here's a housing counselor, or check back, there will be more listings at this point. So all of these principles kind of helped us set the vision to reduce this pain point for people searching and applying for housing. And then the follow through piece was our skateboard, our version of that initial product. We launched something within 90 days, which those of you that work at all with government will know that that's like lightning speed. And our skateboard was a site that just showed listings. We didn't have the application process online. We didn't have the whole ability for housing developers to see the applications come in and lease up the building and all these other features. We just showed the listings. And even within that, we only showed the listings for a particular segment of affordable rental housing. So we really narrowed it in and got something out the door quickly. And that way other people were really excited about it and wanted their listings to be up there, and we created momentum that way. The third is to create advocates. So I think setting the vision and following through on it creates advocates pretty naturally. The city and county of San Francisco, as well as the housing developers involved in San Francisco, have been really huge advocates for us as we've scaled this work across different Bay Area jurisdictions. I remember one of our first meetings with San Mateo County. There were housing developers there that were really skeptical and had a lot of questions, and were asking how this was going to change our process or their process. And before I could even answer, some of the housing developers that had already used the product in San Francisco were advocating for it and were answering their questions. So we created really natural advocates out of the work. And the other thing we did is these advocates started organizing together, right? The different jurisdictions are starting to meet now. Housing developers are talking to each other. Housing developers and jurisdictions are talking to each other in a more collaborative way. So we're actually able to create this really cool community of practice that's focused on improving housing in the Bay Area. And the last is including incentives. So beyond people sort of drinking the Kool-Aid and this making lives easier for everyone, what are some key incentives that you can include for people to join the movement? Obviously, the product really does make people's lives easier. It's been vetted by a ton of stakeholders. Something we haven't mentioned is that for every other week for several years, we would test this product with housing applicants. So they were heavily involved in the process. But one of our really key incentives has been to create the product as an open source product. And what this opens up is that jurisdictions have a lot of flexibility in how they adopt and maintain it. Jurisdictions with engineers internally can adopt the tool themselves. They could potentially also share resources and maintenance costs between jurisdictions, which they're exploring now. So the open source option really gives them incentive that this product is going to have some longevity and solve their problems in the long term. Cool. We also, we have a bonus lesson, which is to be patient. We've worked on this project since 2015 with San Francisco, and we're still continuing to work on it with them and build out the product. We spent 2 years, correct me if I'm wrong, Zach, talking to a bunch of other jurisdictions before the second jurisdiction signed on, which was San Mateo County. And so it really does take a long time to build relationships and understand what people's needs are and how they might be different. The second and third and fourth jurisdiction had slightly different needs, and we needed to take some time to understand them. So I think community building, unlike kind of agile product management, does take a lot of patience and time to slowly get momentum. Zach, do you want to add anything here before we wrap? We're getting at time.
Yeah, it was at least 2 years, so that sounds right.
At least 2 years. Well, we have a few minutes left. Thank you guys for listening to our story. We also have more information in a newsletter you can sign up for at housing.exygy.com if you want to kind of stay up to date on the progress of our project. And I do see that we have some questions in the Zoom chat, so I'm happy to take the last few minutes to answer those. Or Ivy, was that our plan?
Yeah, that's totally fine. I think we have about 3 minutes, so whoever unmutes first gets the first grab.
Okay, great.
I'm curious how you guys targeted the different constituencies and agencies that you guys focused to build that MVP, and what it was like dealing with program stakeholders in directing that.
Yeah, you mean the initial MVP we built out in San Francisco?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we debated a lot around what would go up on the site first. There are two main kind of types of housing, especially in San Francisco. There's what's called below market rate housing, which a lot of that is created by market rate developers. And then there's what's called 100% affordable housing. And that's often housing built by nonprofit housing developers focused on key subgroups like seniors or veterans. We ended up focusing on the market rate developers first, and that was because they don't have an existing process or system for how to get lower middle income families into their housing and how to check eligibility criteria. The nonprofits were pretty staffed up on that. They have a whole process for it. Market rate developers don't. So we could solve that pain point for them. And also the city had a little bit more regulation and more of a stick to say, hey, you guys have to follow this process. This is what you have to do with those market rate developers. So that it just lended itself to being able to solve a smaller problem with that group first before we took on the complexity of all the different types of housing that the nonprofits were building, if that makes sense. One more question, 60 seconds. I see we have kind of a question in the chat around Common App.
Hey, this is Ivy again. I know we probably have so much more to talk about on this topic, and a lot of folks here are super passionate about this project, and we would love to continue this conversation. Please do keep and take a screenshot of Roshan and Zach's email so that you can keep in touch with us. And also, obviously, we're available via Slack in the Good Tech Fest channel. And please do sign up for our newsletter. We are continuing this conversation around the country and specifically around the Bay Area as well. So if there's any interest in keeping in touch, contact us, as well as signing up for our newsletter would be the best way.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.